The city of Phnom Penh, capital of Kampuchea. Just 2 years ago, Phnom Penh was deserted and dilapidated, a legacy of the discredited Khmer Rouge government of Pol Pot, who forced all the townspeople out to the countryside to work the fields. Today, the city's population is back to around 500,000. The market stalls are full, and the recent scenes of near starvation on a massive scale are a fading memory. Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge were driven out early in 1979. But the present Heng Samrin administration, which is backed by Vietnam, still has a chronically underdeveloped country to manage. The people have endured a decade of warfare and political turmoil. Prince Sihanouk tried in vain to steer a neutralist course. Then the Vietnam War spilled across the borders and the anti-communist Lon Nol came to power. And in 1975, the Khmer Rouge swept into Phnom Penh. Heng Samrin, with Vietnamese help, is now trying to do better. At least he claims to have brought an end to the mass killings. An ordinary enough building, a former secondary school in Phnom Penh, was in reality one of the centres of mass killings carried out in the name of the Khmer Rouge Revolution. Tens of thousands of Kampucheans died here between 1975 and the end of 1978. The building, which bears the name of Tuol Sleng, held between 1,000 and 1,500 prisoners at any one time. There were 200 guards, interrogators, torturers, and other staff. Prisoners were shackled to the floor of their cells, which were just big enough for a person to lie down in. As in the concentration camps of Nazi Germany, a meticulous record was kept of all the prisoners. Even those who were already condemned to death were carefully photographed by their captors. Another echo of the extermination camps from another generation, the piles of victims' clothes. Prisoners being interrogated were chained to beds like these. The instruments of torture have been left as they were found. The camp's official archives make a chilling sight. They contain alleged confessions extracted under torture. Often they name a prisoner's friends or colleagues, possibly completely innocent, who would then be arrested and tortured in their turn too. The documents are being carefully studied by a young Australian historian, Ben Kierman. His research indicates that nearly every prisoner was subjected to the same process.
The system was that people would be arrested either in Phnom Penh in the countryside, brought here and forced to write confessions. Under torture, there are some documents which are reports from the interrogators to their superiors explaining what methods of torture they've used, such as in the case of Hu Nim, who was a well-known revolutionary minister. He was stuffed with water and beaten 5 or 6 times. There's documents remaining which report that. The confessions were done in many different versions. In Hu Nim's case, at least 7 times he was forced to rewrite his confession. After each time he would finish the writing and the confession would be sent to a man called Duc, who was the director of the prison under the Pol Pot regime, and he would go through the confession, correcting in red on the side, in the margins, pointing out things to be changed or things to be added in or left out. You can see Duc's writing here with his signature at the bottom here, dated April 77.
Now, what happened when the confession was complete, in the case, say, of Hu Nim?
Well, when they were satisfied that he had confessed neatly enough, and it was very important to have it neatly. Some of the later versions are written out with no spelling mistakes, no cross-outs. After all the corrections became very methodical. and after that, then they would be killed.
One of the most gruesome sights at the death centre, a map of Kampuchea made from the skulls of Khmer Rouge victims. In another room hang paintings by one of the 12 prisoners who survived, rescued when the Vietnamese forces reached Phnom Penh. This painting shows the water torture. Camp documents contain notes by the torturers on just how long it took a body to float to the surface, signalling death.
In the 2 years that we spent here,
The Australian historian acted as interpreter for Ing Pek, one of the small group of survivors. He says he was spared because he alone knew how to keep the machinery running at the centre.
to come to their assistance.
For 2 years, he had to listen to the screams of helpless prisoners.
And he would hear voices all the time, and then they would suddenly stop. The torture.
How did they actually, when the torture was finished, how did they actually kill most people?
They would bash people to death, or they would chop them, and a doctor would, in a scientific way, take their blood. They'd use sticks, iron bars, or bamboo sticks. They would bash people.
On the Mekong River, northeast of Phnom Penh, lies the provincial capital of Kampong Cham. Like so many towns in Kampuchea, it suffered considerably in the fighting 2 years ago, and its former population of 100,000 is down to about 12,000. The wrecked vehicles show how the Khmer Rouge radicals set out systematically to smash everything mechanical. Units of the fledgling Kampuchean army patrol the streets, a distraction for the children, who for the first time in their lives can enjoy a comparatively normal existence. The equipment and the fuel to run the vehicles are provided by the Vietnamese, who inherited huge quantities of arms after the communist victory in the Vietnam War. Today, those same arms are being used to defend the Heng Samrin government against threats from outside and inside Kampuchea's borders. The Khmer Rouge also partly destroyed the city's technical university, once the second biggest centre of learning in the country. Teachers and intellectuals were a prime target for the Khmer Rouge cadres. Just outside Kampong Cham is more horrific evidence of mass executions. This is said to have been the killing ground for Pol Pot opponents from miles around, and more human remains have been found here than anywhere else in the country. The bodies of the victims were thrown down a well over 12 meters deep. The well was found full up to the top with the remains of corpses, and the stench of death still hangs in the air. The local people say victims were driven to this spot in trucks, while loudspeakers assured them they were being taken to a reception. After a short walk, the prisoners found themselves in front of freshly dug pits up to 4 meters deep. They were then killed, usually by blows to the back of the neck, and their bodies then thrown into the waiting graves. The war also left thousands of orphans. At the orphanage here in Kampong Cham, there are over 100 children aged between 4 and 16 who lost both their parents and who have no other close relatives able to care for them. Western charities are helping here, but there is practically no educational equipment and very few books. Illustrations are done by the children themselves. The usual theme, war. Even the simplest toys are regarded as prized possessions, and a ball is treasured more than anything. It's a simple scene, and it shows the renewed vigor in Kampuchea today. The main priority is feeding the children. There are about $7 available to provide for one child per month. The staple diet has to be rice. The 4 officials running the orphanage say the children are always hungry. But they look better fed and clothed than many of their age group seen in the streets of the towns and cities, and they at least live an organized existence. Their future, however hard, must be brighter than the horror-filled past. The roads of Kampuchea are again filled with peasants on the move. But today, they are not refugees fleeing a conflict. They are taking part in one of the main tasks facing the authorities, the distribution of food supplies. Until the main rice harvest in December, Kampucheans remain dependent on relief supplies in order to keep hunger at bay. Our film crew was on the road about halfway between Phnom Penh and the Vietnamese border when it arrived at a village bursting at the seams with people. International relief organizations have been operating in the country for months with Vietnamese permission, and we asked a representative of the Oxfam group, Bill Yates, how the relief program was planned.
Well, I suppose agriculture has been the main thing. We've brought in altogether 13,000 tons of rice seed now. That's in the ground. And the harvest will be beginning to come in November. We brought a lot of fertilizer in as well, insecticides and that sort of thing. So that's the main input that we've made. We hope that it'll be a reasonable harvest. And although the Kampucheans will still need food aid next year, it'll be nothing like as much as they've needed this year.
The aid being distributed was mixed, with Russian maize arriving in some sacks and Red Cross flour in others. Rationing means 1 kilo of flour per person per month. The new leaders are fully aware, though, that handing out of food is not a lasting solution. So great efforts have been made to get grain seed planted in the rice-growing areas, and a good December harvest is expected. The journey to the easternmost part of Kampuchea revealed evidence of the cross-border fighting which sparked off the massive intervention by the Vietnamese army. These Vietnamese border buildings were attacked late in 1978 by the Khmer Rouge, who sent in 3 whole divisions. A few weeks later, however, it was the Vietnamese army which rolled in the opposite direction, through the Kampuchean border post here, and eventually right as far as the western border with Thailand. This border is now mainly symbolic. The Vietnamese come and go as they please. The Mekong River was a big natural obstacle for the invading Vietnamese. Today, their troops cross on the ferries without any opposition. Historically, there has been great enmity between Cambodian and Vietnamese peoples. The Cambodians called their neighbors young, or savages. But the Vietnamese troops inside Kampuchea, as many as 200,000, have been well disciplined and have not behaved like a repressing, occupying army. They are concentrating on seeking out the remnants of the Khmer Rouge forces, and the majority of Kampucheans seem to appreciate this. For the conservative Southeast Asian states, and for China too, the continuing Vietnamese presence is not at all welcoming. But as long as the Khmer Rouge survive as a serious threat, Vietnam says its troops will stay on in Kampuchea. The road journey across the country is long and bumpy. Along the way, odd groups of armed men are a frequent sight. They belong, in fact, to the new Kampuchean army, which numbers about 15,000. In contrast to the disciplined Vietnamese, they dress in an assortment of clothes, wear flowers behind their ears, and even carry guitars as well as rifles on their backs. As we approach the border with Thailand, the picture changes again. Across this border comes a flood of Western consumer goods, as well as relief aid, and private enterprise and initiative is thriving. Every means of transport crowds the roads, heading from Sisophon, near the border, to the provincial capital of Battambang, then on to Phnom Penh, and even on to Vietnam. The local militia carry out checks, but they are mainly concerned with arms. Ordinary smugglers are tolerated, and they are helping in their own way to recreate centers of commerce and trade. The market at Battambang offers customers a surprising range of Western goods. It's hard to believe that the country was so recently in economic ruin, or that the new administration is committed to a Marxist economic regime rather than to the open market of capitalism. Trading has also been given a boost by the reintroduction of Kampuchean currency, the rial, though a Japanese motorbike will cost the equivalent of $1,000. This mass of humanity are railway passengers, leaving Battambang for Phnom Penh, nearly all of them loaded down with goods like cigarettes, sandals and clothes from across the border. The passenger traffic between Battambang and Phnom Penh is so heavy that people even crowd onto the flat cars placed in front of the engine in order to set off any mines laid on the track. The train was in fact attacked twice in 3 months by Khmer Rouge guerrilla units, killing over 150 people the first time and over 50 the next time. A decade ago, the Khmer Rouge used the old temple ruins at Angkor Wat as one of their guerrilla bases against the Lon Nol regime. Today, they have been driven even further back into the jungles and mountains of the northwest, and the Angkor complex has even been reopened to tourists from abroad. The temples were built in the 12th century, when the old Khmer Empire was at its height. They were then lost for centuries, hidden beneath jungle vegetation, until a Frenchman, Henri Mouhot, rediscovered them 120 years ago. Young soldiers are permanently on guard, defending these symbols of national greatness. And there have been raids here both by the Khmer Rouge and by the Khmer Serai, the right-wing force that also has sanctuaries on the Thai border. Sadly, there has been a great deal of vandalism and desecration, and the guides say over 100 heads and statues of Buddhas or god kings have been stolen since the ousting of Pol Pot. Restoration work is badly needed, and if it doesn't come soon, Kampuchea could lose one of its greatest cultural treasures to the jungle again. Another aspect of the Khmer cultural heritage, also hundreds of years old, is Khmer national dancing. All forms of cultural activity were stopped by the Khmer Rouge when they came to power in 1975, and there was a real danger that the traditional dances would be lost forever. In August 1980, however, the ballet school in Phnom Penh at last reopened. 90% of the pupils are orphans, and all are the children of dancers or actors. This explains in part their precocious talent. The Royal Ballet was the pride of the old Cambodian court. Now it is called the State Ballet, although the beauty of the dancers and the splendor of the costumes remain unchanged. Like the ballet school, the State Company has been started up again, but performances so far have been limited to receptions for important visitors. Most importantly, the classical dancing has been saved. So at the end of 1980, after nearly 2 years under the new administration, Kampuchea has taken many positive steps along the road to recovery and towards re-establishing a national identity. The National Army, bolstered by the massive Vietnamese presence, seems capable of preventing a renewal of the disastrous nationwide conflict of Khmer against Khmer, and a peace of sorts has been achieved. The owner of this French bakery in the capital was able to start up his business with help from a Western relief organization, and the Vietnamese have allowed relief groups to operate freely, in spite of considerable opposition to Hanoi in the international political arena. Continued aid from abroad and a good harvest have been bolstered by such examples of market enterprise. The visitor to Phnom Penh is at first surprised by the wide variety of Western goods available, ranging from a doubtful-looking whiskey to nail varnish. But they are in demand, and money is again beginning to circulate. During the fighting and the enforced mass migrations, many Kampucheans buried their gold and family treasures. Now they have recovered them, the economy is on the move, and the riel is again a negotiable currency. Whether Phnom Penh and Kampuchea are returning to normalcy was a question we put to relief worker Mr. Yates.
Yes, I can say that since I've been here, which is, 3 months now, the change that I've seen, not only in the countryside, but also here in the city, there's a much greater tempo, there's much more movement. People are going about their business with purpose and with a great degree of freedom. There are not restrictions that are evident on people. That's not to say that the Khmer people don't still need a hell of a lot of help. I'd say that the relief stage of the operation here in Kampuchea is over. We're in reconstruction now, and they're going to need help for a long time. This country was absolutely devastated, and the repair and the rebuilding, spare parts, equipment, supplies, training, that sort of thing. That is the sort of work in which we will be involved, probably indefinitely, I hope. Yeah.
In spite of all the signs of recovery, the new Kampuchea remains one of the outcasts at the United Nations, where the Pol Pot faction still occupies the Kampuchean seat. Despite evidence of Khmer Rouge atrocities, most non-communist states refuse to recognize a regime backed by the invading forces of a neighboring government. And while this situation remains, even a socially and economically revitalized Kampuchea will have to keep on waiting for political recognition.